Welcome to Shadows of the Past, where the rain falls softly and the darkness whispers stories of truth. Stories that linger long after the night has faded. Tonight, we invite you to close your eyes and step into a world of mystery, betrayal, and heartbreak. These are true crime tales, woven from the threads of real lives, real loss, and real evil. Each story will pull you deeper, unraveling the secrets hidden in the quiet corners of small towns, and let the sound of the rain guide you. But beware, once you enter these shadows, there's no turning back. This is Volume 11, and the past is waiting. Part 1, the Inman family tragedy, the murder of Summer Inman. In the quiet town of Logan, Ohio, where the hum of small-town life rarely falters, a family lived under the facade of devotion and faith. The Inman family, Bill, Sandra, and their son William Jr., were pillars of their community. They attended church, ran a supposed charity, and smiled for the neighbors. But beneath the surface, something sinister was brewing. A darkness that would shatter lives and leave a community questioning how well they truly knew their neighbors. This is the story of Summer Inman, a young mother whose life was stolen by those closest to her in a betrayal so chilling it defies comprehension. Logan, Ohio, 2010, the Inman family wasn't what they seemed. Bill Inman, a self-proclaimed pastor, preached fire and brimstone while running a charity called Ranch of Mercy. It was supposed to help the downtrodden, but whispers in town suggested it was more of a front than a lifeline. Bill's wife Sandra stood by his side, a quiet woman with a steely resolve. Their son, William Jr., known as Will, was the pride of their family, a boy who'd grown into a man under their watchful eyes. Together, they presented a united front, a family bound by faith and loyalty. But loyalty, as we'll see, can be a dangerous thing when it's twisted into something else. Enter Summer Cook, a bright, vivacious young woman who caught Will's eye in their teenage years. Summer was everything the Inmans weren't: warm, open, and full of life. She dreamed of a future beyond the confines of Logan, a place where she could raise her children with love and freedom. When she and Will married, it seemed like a fairy tale. They had 3 children, Alex, Kelly, and Alana, and for a while, the Inman household buzzed with the chaos of family life. But fairy tales don't last forever, not when secrets fester in the shadows. By 2010, Summer's marriage to Will was crumbling. Will, shaped by his parents' controlling ways, had become possessive, suffocating Summer with rules and expectations. She wasn't allowed to work late, to have friends, to live the life she wanted. The once vibrant woman was fading, trapped in a marriage that felt more like a cage. Summer confided in friends that she wanted out. She wanted a divorce, a chance to start over for herself and her children. But in the Inman family, leading wasn't an option. It was a betrayal. Summer moved out, renting a small apartment and taking a job at a local bank. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of hope. She started dating Adam Peters, a kind man who treated her with the respect she'd been denied. Her children, though caught in the crossfire of a bitter custody dispute, were her reason to keep going. But the Inmans weren't about to let her go. Bill, Sandra, and Will began to plot, their anger simmering into something far more dangerous. They wanted Summer back. Not out of love, but out of control. And if they couldn't have her, no one would. March 22, 2011. The night was cold, the kind of chill that seeps into your bones. Summer finished her shift at the bank, her mind likely on her children or her new life with Adam. She stepped into the parking lot, unaware that 3 pairs of eyes were watching her from the shadows. Bill, Sandra, and Will had been planning this moment for weeks. They'd driven to the bank in a van, their intentions unclear even to themselves at first. Maybe they just wanted to scare her, to force her to return to Will. Maybe they wanted to punish her for daring to leave. But what happened next wasn't a scare tactic. It was murder. As Summer approached her car, the Inmans struck. They grabbed her, forcing her into the van with a violence that betrayed their rage. Summer fought, her screams muffled by the night, but no one was there to hear her. The van sped off, leaving her car abandoned in the lot. Inside, the Inman's plan unraveled. What started as a kidnapping turned into something far darker. Will, fueled by years of resentment and his parents' encouragement, took a zip tie from the van. He wrapped it around Summer's throat and pulled. Her struggles grew weaker, her breath shallower, until there was nothing left. Summer Inman, a 25-year-old mother of 3, was gone. The Inmans didn't panic. Not yet. They drove to a place they knew well, a small, abandoned church called Skinnier Faith. where Bill had once preached. It was isolated, forgotten, the perfect place to hide a body. There, in the dead of night, they opened a septic tank behind the church and dumped Summer's lifeless form inside. The lid was sealed, the van cleaned, and the Inmans returned home as if nothing had happened. They thought they'd gotten away with it. They thought no one would suspect a family so steeped in faith, but secrets have a way of surfacing. The next day, Summer's absence raised alarms. Her co-workers at the bank reported her missing, and Adam, frantic, contacted the police. The abandoned car in the parking lot was the first clue, its keys still in the ignition. Investigators began to piece together Summer's final moments, and their focus quickly turned to the Inmans. Bill and Sandra played the part of grieving in-laws, while Will stayed silent, his eyes betraying a flicker of guilt. But it was Sandra who cracked first. Under the weight of police questioning, Sandra's resolve crumbled. She confessed, her voice trembling as she recounted the events of that night. She described the kidnapping, the van, the zip tie. She pointed fingers at Will, claiming he was the one who'd killed Summer. But she didn't stop there. She led investigators to the church, to the septic tank where Summer's body lay. The discovery was horrific. A young woman discarded like refuse, her life snuffed out by the very people who should have protected her. The community of Logan reeled, unable to comprehend how a family could commit such an act. The investigation revealed the Inman's twisted motives. Bill, the patriarch, had orchestrated the plan, driven by a need to control and a belief that Summer's departure was a personal affront. Sandra, complicit in her husband's schemes, had gone along with it, perhaps out of fear or blind loyalty. Will, the husband who'd once vowed to love Summer, had let his anger and entitlement consume him. Together, they'd formed a pact, a family united not by love, but by a shared descent into darkness. The trial was a spectacle, a grim unraveling of the Inman family's facade. Prosecutors painted a picture of a calculated crime driven by obsession and revenge. Sandra's confession was the linchpin, corroborated by physical evidence. The zip tie marks on Summer's neck, the tire tracks from the van, the traces of her blood in the church's septic tank. Bill and Will maintained their innocence, blaming Sandra for the murder, but the jury saw through their lies. In 2012, all three were convicted. Bill and Will were sentenced to life without parole, their futures sealed behind bars. Sandra, due to her cooperation, received a life sentence with a possibility of parole after 15 years. But the sentences didn't bring closure. Summer's children, now orphaned by their mother's death and their father's imprisonment, were left to grapple with a legacy of betrayal. Adam Peters, the man who'd given Summer hope, mourned a future that would never be. And the town of Logan, once a place of quiet routines, was forever changed. Whispers lingered about the Inmans, about the church, about the septic tank. Some believed Sandra wasn't the mastermind, that Bill's influence ran deeper than the courts could prove. Others wondered how faith could coexist with such evil. Summer Inman's story is a reminder that monsters don't always lurk in the shadows. Sometimes they sit at your dinner table, pray in your church, and call you family. Her life was stolen not by strangers, but by those who claim to love her most. As the rain falls outside, imagine Summer's final moments, her fear, her fight, her hope for her children. And ask yourself, how well do you know the people closest to you? Because in Logan, Ohio, on a cold March night, a family's love turned to murder, and nothing would ever be the same. Part 2, The Betrayal of Blood, the murder of Jonathan Hoffman. In the serene suburbs of West Bloomfield, Michigan, where manicured lawns and quiet streets paint a picture of tranquility, a different kind of story unfolded. It wasn't the kind of tale that makes headlines for its brutality or shocks a nation with its scale. No, this was a tragedy born in the heart of a family, where love and duty twisted into something unrecognizable. This is the story of Jonathan Hoffman, a troubled teenager whose life was cut short by the one person he should have trusted most, his grandmother, Sandra Lane. What drove a woman of faith and discipline to commit an act so unthinkable? As the rain falls, let's step into the shadows of this chilling betrayal. West Bloomfield, Michigan, 2012. Sandra Lane was a woman who commanded respect. At 74, she was a retired school teacher, a pillar of her church, and a matriarch who lived by a strict moral code. Her home was a sanctuary of order, where rules were followed and deviations were not tolerated. Sandra had raised her own children with an iron hand, and now, in her twilight years, she had taken on a new responsibility. Her grandson, Jonathan Hoffman. At 17, Jonathan was a boy teetering on the edge of adulthood, caught between the promise of his future and the weight of his past. Jonathan's life hadn't been easy. His parents' divorce had left him adrift, shuttling between homes until he landed with Sandra after his mother, Jennifer, struggled to manage his rebellious streak. His younger sister's illness had further strained the family, leaving Jonathan feeling like an afterthought. He was a bright kid. Friends described him as funny, quick-witted, a boy who could light up a room with his smile, but beneath that charm was a storm. Jonathan had fallen into the world of synthetic drugs, a habit that led to brushes with the law and a stint on probation. To Sandra, this was more than a phase. It was a personal affront, a challenge to her authority. Sandra's home became a battleground. She saw Jonathan's drug use as a betrayal of everything she stood for: discipline, faith, and family. She imposed strict rules: no late nights, no unsavory friends, mandatory drug tests. Jonathan chafed under her control, his teenage defiance clashing with her unyielding resolve. To outsiders, they were an odd pair: the stern grandmother and the wayward grandson, bound by blood but divided by expectations. Neighbors noticed the tension, the way Sandra's voice would sharpen when she spoke of Jonathan's failures, but no one could have predicted how far that tension would go. 2012, the sun was setting over West Bloomfield, casting long shadows across Sandra's tidy home. Jonathan had just returned from a probation meeting where he'd failed another drug test. It wasn't the first time, but to Sandra, it was the final straw. She'd warned him before: clean up or face the consequences. That night, the air in the house was thick with unspoken anger. Sandra's husband, Jonathan's grandfather, was conveniently absent, having left earlier at her request. The stage was set, though no one but Sandra knew what was coming. What happened next is a matter of dispute, shrouded in the fog of Sandra's claims and the cold reality of the evidence. According to Sandra, Jonathan came home agitated, his eyes wild from drugs. She said he lunged at her, his temper flaring, and she acted in self-defense. But the truth tells a different story, one of calculation, not panic. Sandra retrieved her Glock 17, a handgun she kept for protection. She didn't call the police. She didn't try to calm Jonathan or lock herself away. Instead, she confronted him in the living room, where the boy stood, unarmed and unaware. The first shot rang out, a deafening crack in the quiet house. Jonathan staggered, blood blooming on his chest. But Sandra didn't stop. She fired again and again and again, over 10 rounds in total, each one tearing through the teenager's body. The bullets pierced his lungs, his heart, his stomach. Jonathan collapsed, his life draining onto the hardwood floor. When the gunfire stopped, Sandra stood over her grandson, the gun still warm in her hand. There was no frenzy, no chaos, just silence. And a boy who would never rise again. Sandra's story of self-defense began almost immediately. She called 911, her voice steady as she claimed Jonathan had attacked her. She described a struggle, a desperate fight for her life. But when police arrived, the scene didn't match her tale. Jonathan's body bore no signs of aggression, no clenched fist, no defensive wounds. The toxicology report was even more damning. Jonathan hadn't used drugs that day. His system was clean, his mind clear. The boy Sandra, painted as a raging addict, was just a teenager, caught in a moment of vulnerability. Investigators dug deeper, and the cracks in Sandra's story widened. The placement of the bullets suggested precision, not panic. Several shots had struck Jonathan in the back, as if he'd been turning away, perhaps trying to flee. The gun, a Glock 17, had been fired at close range, with no signs of a struggle. And then there was the matter of Sandra's husband. Why had she asked him to leave the house that evening? Why had she waited until they were alone? The pieces began to form a chilling picture. This wasn't a spontaneous act. It was planned. Sandra's motive, prosecutors would later argue, was rooted in control. Jonathan's rebellion, his failed drug tests, his defiance, they were an affront to her authority, a stain on her reputation. To Sandra, he wasn't just a grandson. He was a problem to be solved. She'd tried discipline, lectures, even prayer, but nothing had worked. In her mind, Jonathan was spiraling toward ruin, and she couldn't bear the shame of his failures. So she took matters into her own hands, choosing a permanent solution to a temporary problem. The investigation moved swiftly. Detectives interviewed neighbors, friends, and Jonathan's mother, Jennifer, who was devastated by the loss of her son. Jennifer painted a different picture of Sandra. Not a loving grandmother, but a woman consumed by judgment and rigidity. She recalled Sandra's frustration with Jonathan, her threats to fix him if he didn't shape up. Friends of Jonathan's echoed this, describing how he felt trapped in Sandra's home, his spirit crushed by her rules. One friend, tears in his eyes, said Jonathan had been trying to change, to make his grandmother proud. He never got the chance. Forensic evidence sealed Sandra's fate. Ballistics confirmed the Glock 17 was the murder weapon, registered in her name. Gunpowder residue on her hands linked her to the shooting. The absence of drugs in Jonathan's system undermined her claim of a drug-fueled attack. And then there was the chilling detail of the bullet trajectories. Shots fired from above, as if Sandra had stood over Jonathan as he fell. The crime scene told a story of execution, not self-defense. Sandra's arrest shocked West Bloomfield. This was a woman who'd taught generations of children, who'd sung hymns in church every Sunday. How could she have done this? Neighbors whispered about her stern demeanor, her obsession with perfection, but no one had seen this coming. At her arraignment, Sandra sat stone-faced, her eyes fixed on some distant point. She pleaded not guilty, clinging to her story of a grandmother forced to protect herself. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the community's faith in her was gone. The trial, held in 2013, was a gut-wrenching affair. Prosecutors presented a meticulous case, laying out the forensic evidence and exposing Sandra's lies. They called Jennifer to the stand, where she spoke through tears about her son's dreams, his humor, his struggles. "He was my boy," she said, her voice breaking. "She took him from me." Jonathan's friends testified too, painting a picture of a teenager who was flawed but full of potential. Defense, meanwhile, leaned heavily on Sandra's story of self-defense, portraying her as a frail, elderly woman terrified of her grandson's alleged aggression. They even suggested Jonathan's drug history made him unpredictable, a threat to Sandra's safety. The jury wasn't swayed. After a week of testimony, they deliberated for just 3 hours before returning a verdict: guilty of manslaughter and firearms charges. The charge wasn't murder. Sandra's age and her lack of prior criminal history softened the outcome, but it was a conviction nonetheless. She was sentenced to 20 years for manslaughter and an additional 2 years for the gun charge, a total of 22 years. At 74, it was effectively a life sentence. Sandra showed no emotion as the gavel fell, her face as unreadable as it had been throughout the trial. Jonathan's death left a void that could never be filled. Jennifer, his mother, became an advocate for troubled teens, channeling her grief into a mission to help others like her son. She spoke out against Sandra, calling her a monster in grandmother's clothing. Jonathan's friends held a memorial where they shared stories of his laughter and his dreams of becoming a mechanic. They planted a tree in his honor at his high school, a quiet tribute to a boy who'd been taken too soon. West Bloomfield grappled with the aftermath. The case sparked debates about family dynamics, mental health, and the pressures of caregiving. Some wondered if Sandra's strict upbringing had warped her sense of right and wrong, turning discipline into destruction. Others questioned whether Jonathan's struggles could have been addressed with compassion instead of control. The truth, as always, lay in the gray spaces. 2 lives intertwined, one lost to addiction and rebellion, the other to pride and rage. Jonathan Hoffman's story is a warning of what happens when love curdles into judgment, when family becomes a battlefield. Sandra Lane wasn't a stranger or a predator. She was the woman who tucked Jonathan in as a child, who prayed for his soul. Yet, in a single moment, she chose to end his life, to silence his defiance with a hail of bullets. As the rain falls outside, picture Jonathan's final seconds, his confusion, his pain, his realization that the person he trusted most had turned against him. And ask yourself, what lies beneath the surface of the families we know? Because in West Bloomfield, Michigan, on a quiet May evening, a grandmother's love became a death sentence, and the echoes of that betrayal still linger. Part 3. A Walk in the Dark, the murder of Zara Elena. In the bustling streets of East London, where the city's heartbeat pulses through crowded bars and neon-lit corners, life moves fast. It's a place where dreams are chased, where people weave in and out of each other's paths, often unnoticed. But on one fateful night in June 2022, a young woman's walk home became a descent into horror. Zara Elena, a vibrant soul with a passion for justice, crossed paths with a predator who had been set free to roam. This is the story of her final moments, a tragedy that exposed the failures of a system meant to protect, and a community left to mourn, a light extinguished too soon. As the rain falls, let's tread carefully into the shadows of Ilford, where a single night changed everything. London, 2022. Zara Aliena was a name that carried warmth. At 35, she was a woman of purpose, a law graduate working at the Crown Prosecution Service, driven by a desire to make the world fairer. Her friends described her as a whirlwind of energy, always laughing, always creating, whether through her art, her poetry, or her advocacy for those in need. Zara was the kind of person who lit up a room, her smile a beacon in the chaos of city life. The neighborhood in Ilford, a diverse working-class neighborhood in East London, where she felt at home among the eclectic mix of cultures and stories. Zara's life was full. She'd recently started a new job, one that aligned with her dream of reforming the justice system. She spent her evenings with friends, dancing at local bars or sketching in her apartment. Her family, especially her Aunt Farah, was her anchor. Zara was the youngest of three, a daughter who brought joy to every gathering, but beneath her vibrant exterior was a quiet strength, a resolve to stand up for what was right. She believed in second chances and redemption, a belief that, tragically, would collide with a system that failed her. Enter Jordan McWeeny, a name that would soon become synonymous with terror. At 29, McWeeny was a man adrift, a career criminal with a rap sheet stretching back years. Burglary, assault, drug offenses. He'd cycled through prisons, each release followed by another crime. By 2022, he was out on license, a condition of his latest sentence that required him to report regularly and stay out of trouble. But McWeeny had no intention of playing by the rules. He was living rough, bouncing between hostels and the streets, his life a spiral of addiction and violence. The system tasked with monitoring him was stretched thin, and McWeeny slipped through the cracks, a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. June 26, 2022. The night was warm, the kind that draws people out to savor the last hours of the weekend. Zara had spent the evening at a bar in Ilford, laughing with friends over drinks. She was in high spirits, her laughter echoing through the crowded room. As midnight approached, she decided to head home, a short walk through familiar streets. She said her goodbyes, her friends watching as she stepped into the night, her silhouette fading under the streetlights. It was a walk she'd made countless times before. She had no reason to fear, but someone was watching. Jordan McWeeny had been prowling Ilford that night, his mind clouded by drugs and desperation. He'd been in and out of bars, his presence unsettling to those who crossed his path. When he saw Zara leaving the bar, something snapped. She was alone, vulnerable, a target for the rage and impulses he could no longer control. He followed her, keeping his distance at first, his footsteps silent against the hume of the city. Zara, unaware, walked along Cranbrook Road, her thoughts likely on the day ahead, her new job, her dreams. The attack came without warning. In a dark stretch of the street, McWeeny closed the distance. He grabbed Zara, his hands rough and unrelenting. She fought back, her screams piercing the night, but the street was empty, the city indifferent. McWeeny's assault was brutal. Blows rained down on Zara's face, her body, her spirit. He dragged her to a nearby alley where the violence escalated. Zara, a woman who dedicated her life to justice, was subjected to an unimaginable horror. When it was over, McWeeny left her broken body on the pavement, hidden in the shadows of a driveway. He fled into the night, leaving no trace but the devastation he'd wrought. Zara wasn't found until the early hours of the morning. A passerby walking home noticed a figure slumped on the ground. At first, they thought she was drunk or sleeping, but as they drew closer, the truth became clear. Zara was gone, her body cold, her face bruised beyond recognition. The passerby called for help, their voice trembling as paramedics rushed to the scene, but it was too late. Zara Jelena, a woman who'd lived for others, was dead at 35, her life stolen in a matter of minutes. The discovery sent shockwaves through Ilford. Police cordoned off Cranbrook Road, their lights casting an eerie glow over the crime scene. Investigators worked through the night collecting evidence, a shoe print, a discarded cigarette butt, traces of blood. CCTV footage from nearby businesses became their lifeline, capturing a grainy image of a man following Zara, his movements predatory, deliberate. The footage was chilling. Zara walking with purpose, unaware of the figure trailing her. The man, later identified as McWeeny, was unmistakable, his face caught in a fleeting moment of clarity. The investigation moved at a relentless pace. Detectives traced McWeeney's movements, piecing together his path through Ilford's bars and streets. They found him within hours, holed up in a hostel, his clothes still stained with Zorro's blood. DNA evidence linked him to the crime scene, a match so precise it left no room for doubt. When questioned, McWeeney offered no remorse, no explanation. He was a man detached from the gravity of his actions, his eyes hollow, his words clipped. To him, Zara was just another victim, a means to an end. The truth of McWeeney's freedom began to emerge, and it was a truth that enraged the city. He'd been released from prison only days before the murder, despite a history of violence and repeated violations of his license. The probation service, underfunded and overwhelmed, had failed to track him. Warnings about his behavior had gone unheeded, reports filed but never acted upon. McWeeney was a known risk, a man who'd shown no signs of reform, yet he'd been allowed to walk. Zara's death wasn't just a crime, it was a failure, a betrayal of the system she'd believed in. The trial, held in 2023, was a reckoning. Prosecutors laid out a case that was both airtight and heartbreaking. They presented the CCTV footage, the DNA evidence, the testimony of the passerby who'd found Zara's body. They called her friends and family to the stand, each one painting a picture of a woman who'd lived fiercely and loved deeply. Zara's Aunt Farah spoke with a quiet strength, her voice breaking as she described Zara's dreams, her laughter, her unwavering belief in justice. "She was our light," Farah said, her words echoing in the silent courtroom, "and he took her from us." McWeeney's defense was feeble, a patchwork of excuses that crumbled under scrutiny. His lawyers argued he was a product of his environment, a man broken by poverty and addiction. They claimed the attack wasn't premeditated, that McWeeney had acted in a drug-fueled haze. But the evidence told a different story, one of intent, of a man who'd chosen his victim and pursued her with chilling precision. The jury deliberated for less than a day before returning a verdict: guilty of murder, rape, and robbery. The judge sentenced McWeeney to life in prison with a minimum term of 33 years. At 29, it was a sentence that would likely keep him behind bars for decades. But the sentence offered little comfort to Zara's family. Farah, now a vocal advocate against gender-based violence, channeled her grief into action. She campaigned for reforms to the probation system, demanding accountability for those who'd failed Zara. She spoke at rallies, her voice a clarion call for change, urging society to confront the epidemic of violence against women. Zara's friends, too, honored her memory, creating art installations and poetry readings in her name. Ilford, a community that had lost one of its brightest stars, came together in mourning, their grief tempered by a resolve to make their streets safer. The aftermath of Zara's murder exposed deep flaws in the justice system. An inquest revealed the probation service's shortcomings, missed meetings, ignored warnings, a lack of resources that allowed McWeeney to slip through the cracks. The government promised reforms, but for many it was too little too late. Zara's death became a rallying cry, a symbol of the countless women whose lives are stolen by violence. Her story sparked protests, vigils, and a renewed focus on protecting those most vulnerable, but it also left a question that lingered like a ghost. How many more would fall before the system changed? Zara Alina's story is a stark reminder of the fragility of safety, of a thin line between a routine walk home and a nightmare. She was a woman who lived with purpose, who believed in the power of justice to heal a broken world. Yet, in a cruel twist, it was the failure of that very system that allowed her life to be taken. As the rain falls outside, imagine Zara's final moments, her courage, her fight, her hope that someone would hear her cry. And ask yourself, what does it mean to trust a system that lets predators roam free? Because in Ilford, London, on a warm June night, a woman's walk home became her end. And the shadows of that loss still haunt us. Part 4, The Stalker in the Shadows, the murder of Jody Sanderholm. In the heart of Arkansas City, Kansas, a small town where everyone knows your name, life moves at a gentle pace. The streets are lined with familiar faces, and the rhythm of daily routines offers a sense of safety. But in January 2007, that illusion of security was shattered. Jody Sanderholm, a vibrant young woman with dreams as big as the prairie sky, became the target of a predator hiding in plain sight. Her story is one of innocence stolen, of a community betrayed, and of a family's relentless fight for justice. As the rain falls, let's step into the shadows of Arkansas City, where a single day changed everything. Arkansas City, 2007, Jody Sanderholm was a beacon of light in her small town. At 19, she was a sophomore at Cowley Community College, a talented dancer and a proud member of the Tigerette dance team. Her infectious smile and boundless energy made her a favorite among friends and teachers alike. Jody was the kind of person who dreamed big. She wanted to travel, to perform, to carve out a life filled with purpose. She lived with her parents, Brian and Cindy, in a close-knit family where love was the foundation. Her days were filled with classes, dance rehearsals, and laughter, her future stretching out like an open road. But every light casts a shadow, and Jody's was darker than most. His name was Justin Thurber, a 22-year-old drifter who'd grown up on the fringes of Arkansas City. To those who knew him, Thurber was an enigma, quiet, awkward, with a gaze that lingered too long. He graduated high school and briefly attended college, but his life lacked direction. Beneath his unassuming exterior was a growing obsession, one that fueled a dangerous fixation on women. Thurber had a history of stalking, leaving notes and flowers for co-workers, watching from a distance. His behavior was unsettling, but in a small town it was often dismissed as harmless. That was a mistake that would cost Jody her life. January 5, 2007. The day began like any other. Jody spent the morning at college, then headed to a Tigerette rehearsal in the early afternoon. The dance studio was her sanctuary, a place where she could lose herself in movement and music. As she left the rehearsal, laughing with her teammates, she was unaware that Thurber was watching. He'd been in the college parking lot, his light blue Cadillac parked just out of sight. Jody was on his radar, a target chosen not by chance, but by a twisted compulsion. He'd seen her before, perhaps at a performance or around town, and her vibrancy had drawn him in like a moth to a flame. Well, Jody's next stop was home, a quick trip to check the mailbox before heading back out. It was a mundane task, one she'd done countless times. But as she stepped out of her car, Thurber was there, waiting. He'd followed her from the college, his car trailing hers through the quiet streets. The moment she reached the mailbox, he struck. In broad daylight, with neighbors just yards away, Thurber attacked, forcing Jody into her own car. Her screams were brief, swallowed by the roar of the engine as he sped away. Her life, now in the hands of a man consumed by darkness. What happened next is a nightmare etched into the annals of Arkansas City. Thurber drove Jody to the Sea Wildlife area, a remote stretch of rugged terrain far from prying eyes. There, in the desolate silence of the prairie, he unleashed his rage. Jody was subjected to a brutal assault, her body battered, her spirit broken. When it was over, Thurber wrapped a cord around her neck and squeezed, stealing her final breath. He hid her body under a pile of leaves, logs, and twigs, a crude attempt to erase his crime. Jody's car was another problem. He drove it to the nearby C.I. County State Fishing Lake and pushed it into the water, watching it sink beneath the surface. Thurber returned home, his clothes washed, his shoes scrubbed clean of mud. He thought he'd covered his tracks, that the wilderness would keep his secret. But Jody's absence was noticed almost immediately. Her parents, Brian and Cindy, grew worried when she didn't return home. Her friends, alarmed by her silence, alerted the police. By evening, a search was underway, and Jody's abandoned belongings, her wallet, her Tigerette jacket, her driver's license, were found scattered near the fishing lake. The discovery was chilling. A sandal, a leotard, a car seat cushion, all floating in the water or stuffed into chemical toilets. Jody was gone, and the town knew something terrible had happened. The investigation zeroed in on Thurber almost immediately. His Cadillac had been spotted in the college parking lot, captured on grainy security footage. A witness, Jody's best friend, Lori, confirmed seeing him there, his presence out of place and unsettling. Detectives tracked his movements, finding his phone pinging in the same areas as Jody's on the day she vanished. Shoe prints at the Sea Wildlife area matched his sneakers, and smaller prints nearby belonged to Jody's shoes. The evidence was mounting, but the most damning discovery was yet to come. So searchers combed the wildlife area, their hearts heavy with dread. On January 9, they found Jody's body, hidden beneath the debris. The sight was devastating. A young woman, her life snuffed out, her dreams buried in the dirt. Sonar teams located her car in the lake, its interior flooded, but forensics worked tirelessly. A single hair found on the driver's seat was tested for mitochondrial DNA. The result was unmistakable. It belonged to Justin Thurber. DNA from Jody's body further linked him to the crime, a connection so precise it silenced any doubt. Thurber's lies began to unravel. He claimed he'd been with friends that day, stuck in a car near a place called Seattle, but his friends denied it, and when police took him to the supposed location, he couldn't pinpoint where it happened. His story was a fabrication, a desperate attempt to dodge the noose tightening around him. At the police station, he volunteered for a polygraph test, perhaps believing he could outsmart the machine. He didn't. The evidence was overwhelming: footprints, DNA, phone data, and the haunting footage of his car trailing Jody's. Justin Thurber was arrested, charged with kidnapping, rape, and murder. Trial, held in 2009, was a crucible of grief and rage. Prosecutors painted a picture of a calculated predator, a man who'd stalked Jody, planned her abduction, and executed her with chilling precision. They presented the DNA evidence, the shoe prints, the testimony of Lori, who'd seen Thurber in the parking lot. Jody's parents, Brian and Cindy, sat in the courtroom, their faces etched with pain as the medical examiner described her final moments. The autopsy revealed bruises across her body, abrasions on her face, and the unmistakable marks of strangulation. Her death had been slow, painful, a horror no one could unsee. Thurber's defense was a desperate ploy. His attorneys argued he was mentally incompetent, claiming his high school graduation and brief college stint masked a deeper disability. The judge wasn't convinced. Thurber's actions showed planning, not impulsivity. Witnesses, including his ex-girlfriends and 6 other women, testified to his stalking behavior, painting a portrait of a man obsessed with control. One woman recounted finding a rose and a note on her car, Thurber's clumsy attempted affection that left her terrified. The jury saw through his facade, convicting him on all counts. The sentence was death by lethal injection, a verdict met with somber nods from Jody's family. But justice was elusive. In 2018, the Kansas Supreme Court postponed Thurber's execution, citing a U.S. Supreme Court ruling against executing those with developmental disabilities. A competency hearing from the original trial had deemed Thurber fit, but his attorneys persisted, pointing to his prison letters as evidence of his mental state. Cindy Sanderholm, Jody's mother, was furious, arguing that Thurber's ability to write to other women showed his cunning, not his incapacity. "He's thick," she said, her voice trembling. "He knows what he's doing." The legal battle dragged on, a wound that refused to heal. The aftermath of Jody's murder reshaped Arkansas City. The town, once a place of trust, became weary, its residents haunted by the knowledge that evil had walked among them. Jody's family fought for change, their grief-fueling advocacy. The Jody Act, passed in Kansas in 2008, expanded police powers to address stalking, a direct response to Thurber's predatory behavior. Cindy, a tireless voice for her daughter, spoke at community events, her words a plea for vigilance. But the loss of Jody, and later Cindy herself in 2022, left a void that no law could fill. Jody's son, her own story, is a haunting reminder that danger can lurk behind familiar faces in the places we call home. She was a young woman with a future full of promise, stolen by a man who saw her not as a person, but as a target. As the rain falls outside, imagine Jody's final moments, her fear, her fight, her hope that someone would find her. Then ask yourself, how well do we know the shadows that linger in our town? Because in Arkansas City, Kansas, on a cold January day, a stalker's obsession became a death sentence, and the echoes of that loss still resonate. Part 5, A Predator's Trap, the murder of Kelsey Smith. In the suburban sprawl of Overland Park, Kansas, where shopping malls and cul-de-sacs define the landscape, life feels safe, predictable. It's the kind of place where families thrive, where teenagers hang out at Target and plan their futures. But on a warm June evening in 2007, that sense of security was shattered. Kelsey Smith, an 18-year-old with a heart full of dreams, stepped into a parking lot and vanished. Her story is one of innocence stolen, of a predator who exploited the ordinary, and of a community forever changed by the horror that unfolded. As the rain falls, let's walk into the shadows of Overland Park, where a single moment turned a routine errand into a nightmare. Overland Park 27. Kelsey Smith was the embodiment of youth and promise. At 18, she just graduated from Shawnee Mission West High School, her eyes set on college and a career in veterinary medicine. She was a cheerleader, a volleyball player, and a girl who radiated kindness. Her friends called her a ray of sunshine. always quick with a laugh or a comforting word. Kelsey lived with her parents, Greg and Missy, and her siblings, a tight-knit family where love was a constant. She'd recently started dating a boy named Brandon, and their budding romance filled her with excitement. Life was good, full of possibility. 2007 began like any other Saturday. Kelsey spent the day with friends, heard laughter echoing through the hours. That evening, she drove to the Oak Park Mall, a sprawling shopping center where teenagers flocked to shop and socialize. Her mission was simple: buy a gift for Brandon to celebrate their 6-month anniversary. She parked her Ford Contour in the lot, walked into Target, and browsed the aisles, unaware that she was being watched. Bust's man in the shadows was Edwin Hall, a 26-year-old drifter whose presence in Overland Park would soon become a chilling footnote in the town's history. Edwin Hall was a man shaped by a troubled past. Raised in foster care, he'd endured a childhood marked by neglect and abuse. By his 20s, he was a loner, drifting through life with a string of petty crimes, burglary, theft, assault. He'd married young to a woman named Aletha, and they'd adopted a son. But their relationship was fraught, strained by Hall's volatility. In June 2007, Hall was living in Olathe, a short drive from Overland Park, working odd jobs and nursing a growing darkness. He was a predator, his impulses unchecked, his gaze fixed on the vulnerable. That evening, Hall was at the Oak Park Mall, prowling the parking lot like a hunter. He'd been there before, watching women, listening to their conversations. Earlier that day, he'd overheard Kelsey on her phone, talking about her plans to shop at Target. It was a fleeting moment, but it was enough. Hall marked her as his target, a young woman alone, unaware of the danger lurking nearby. He followed her into Target, keeping his distance, his baseball cap pulled low. Security cameras captured him, a blurry figure trailing Kelsey through the aisles, his movements deliberate, predatory. Kelsey left Target around 7:15 p.m., a gift bag in hand. She walked to her car, the summer air warm against her skin. The parking lot was busy but not crowded, the kind of place where you don't think twice about walking alone. As she reached her car, Hall struck. He approached her from behind, a .22 caliber pistol in his hand, its barrel glinting in the fading light. He forced her into the driver's seat, climbing in beside her, the gun pressed against her side. Kelsey's heart must have raced, her mind scrambling for a way out, but Hall was in control. He ordered her to drive, and she did, the Ford Contour pulling out of the lot and into the night. Hall directed Kelsey to a secluded area near Longview Lake, a wooded spot straddling the Kansas-Missouri border. It was a place he knew well, a hideout where he could act without fear of interruption. There in the darkness, Hall's intentions became clear. He assaulted Kelsey, his violence a brutal assertion of power. When it was over, he wrapped a belt around her neck, pulling it tight until her struggle ceased. Kelsey Smith, a girl who dreamed of healing animals, was gone, her body left in the underbrush, hidden among the trees. Hall fled, taking her purse and phone, leaving her car abandoned in a nearby lot. Kelsey's absence was noticed almost immediately. When she didn't return home by 8 p.m., her mother, Missy, called her phone. It went straight to voicemail. Panic set in. Greg and Missy contacted Kelsey's friends, then the police, their fear growing with each unanswered call. By 9 p.m., Overland Park police were at the Oak Park Mall, where they found Kelsey's car missing, but her purse and gift bag scattered in the Target lot. The items were a chilling clue. Kelsey would never have left them behind. A search began, volunteers and officers combing the area, their hope fading with each passing hour. The investigation moved at a frantic pace. Detectives pulled security footage from Target, capturing Kelsey's final moments in the store. They saw her browsing, unaware of the man in the baseball cap shadowing her. The footage showed Hall, his face partially obscured, but his build and clothing were distinct. Another camera caught him in the parking lot, following Kelsey to her car. The images were grainy, but they were enough. Police released them to the public, asking for help identifying the man in the cap. Tips flooded in, and one name kept surfacing: Edwin. Hall's arrest came 4 days later on June 6th. Detectives tracked him to his Olathe apartment, where they found him with Aletha and their son. A search of his home turned up damning evidence: a .22 caliber pistol, a belt with traces of Kelsey's DNA, and her stolen purse hidden in a closet. Hall's fingerprints were on the gift bag found in the parking lot, and his phone records placed him near Longview Lake at the time of the murder. When questioned, Hall was defiant, claiming he'd been elsewhere, but his story collapsed under scrutiny. The evidence was overwhelming, a noose tightening around his neck. The search for Kelsey ended on June 6, when volunteers found her body in the woods near Longview Lake. The discovery was devastating. A young woman, her life stolen, her dreams buried in the dirt. The autopsy revealed the horror of her final moments: blunt force trauma, sexual assault, and strangulation by ligature. Her family, gathered at a makeshift command center, collapsed in grief. Greg and Missy clung to each other, their world shattered. Overland Park, a town unaccustomed to such violence, mourned as one, their streets lined with ribbons in Kelsey's favorite color, purple. The trial, held in 2008, was a formality. Hall, facing a mountain of evidence, pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty. Prosecutors laid out the case with clinical precision: the CCTV footage, the DNA on the belt, the fingerprints, the phone records. Kelsey's family sat in the courtroom, their faces etched with pain as the details emerged. Missy spoke through tears, her voice steady despite her grief. "Kelsey was our daughter, our sister, our light," she said. "He took her from us, but he can't take her memory." The judge sentenced Hall to life without parole, a term that ensured he'd never walk free again. But the sentence was only the beginning. Kelsey's family, led by Greg and Missy, turned their grief into action. They discovered that police had struggled to track Kelsey's phone during the search, delayed by bureaucratic hurdles with her carrier. The Smiths fought for change, lobbying for legislation to streamline access to phone data in emergencies. The Kelsey Smith Act, passed in Kansas in 2009 and later adopted in multiple states, was their legacy, a law that has saved countless lives. Missy became a vocal advocate, speaking at schools and rallies, her mission to protect others from the fate her daughter suffered. Overland Park was forever changed. The Oak Park Mall, once a carefree hangout, became a place of quiet reflection, its parking lot a reminder of what was lost. Kelsey's friends honored her with a scholarship fund, supporting students who shared her love for animals. Her school retired her volleyball number, a tribute to a girl who touched so many lives. But the pain lingered, a wound that time could only soften, not heal. The Smiths, though broken, found strength in their faith, believing Kelsey was watching over them, her spirit unbroken. Kelsey Smith's story is a haunting reminder that evil can strike in the most ordinary places, in the moments we feel safest. She was a young woman with a future full of promise, stolen by a man who saw her as nothing more than prey. As the rain falls outside, imagine Kelsey's final moments, her fear, her fight, her hope that someone would find her, and ask yourself, how safe are the places we call home? Because in Overland Park, Kansas, on a warm June evening, a predator's trap closed and a community's heart was broken. Part 6, Serpents and Secrets, the murder of Ben Rennick. In the rolling hills of New Florence, Missouri, where the land stretches wide and the air hums with the quiet of rural life, a different kind of world thrived. It was a world of exotic creatures, of ambition and dreams centered around a man named Ben Rennick. At 29, Ben was a rising star in the reptile breeding industry, his name synonymous with rare snakes and million-dollar deals. But beneath the success lay a web of secrets: infidelity, financial strain, and a marriage crumbling under the weight of ambition. On a fateful day in June 2017, Ben's life was stolen, not by a stranger, but by those closest to him. As the rain falls, let's slither into the shadows of New Florence, where betrayal coiled tighter than any serpent. New Florence, Missouri, 2017. Ben Rennick was a man who turned passion into empire. From a young age, he'd been fascinated by reptiles, collecting snakes and lizards while most kids played with toys. By his 20s, he'd transformed that fascination into Rennick Reptiles, a breeding operation that supplied exotic snakes to collectors worldwide. His pythons and anacondas, some worth tens of thousands of dollars, were his pride and joy. Ben's charisma and business acumen made him a legend in the tight-knit reptile community. His name whispered in awe at trade shows and online forums. He was living the American dream, or so it seemed. At the heart of Ben's world was his wife, Lindley Rennick. A decade his junior, Lindley was a vibrant, ambitious woman who'd grown up in a small Missouri town. She met Ben at a reptile show, their shared love for snakes sparking an instant connection. They married in 2014, blending their lives and businesses. Lindley ran a spa called Ascensia, while Ben focused on the snakes. Together, they had 2 young children, a boy and a girl, and their sprawling property housed thousands of reptiles, each one a testament to Ben's vision. To outsiders, they were a power couple building a future on scales and dreams. But beneath the surface, their marriage was fraying. Ben's business, though lucrative, was a roller coaster of feast and famine. High-value snake sales could bring in hundreds of thousands, but the costs, food, heat, veterinary care, were staggering. Lindley's spa was struggling, bleeding money faster than it earned. The couple argued over finances, their once passionate connection strained by stress and resentment. Lindley, feeling trapped in their rural life, began to seek excitement elsewhere. She started an affair with a man named Brandon Blackwell, a local handyman, and later with another man, Michael Humphrey, a friend of Ben's. The secrets were piling up and Ben was starting to notice. By early 2017, the cracks were undeniable. Ben confided in friends that he suspected Lindley was cheating, though he didn't know the extent. He was considering divorce, a move that would split their assets and threaten Lindley's lifestyle. She, meanwhile, was growing desperate. A $1 million, 0-cent life insurance policy on Ben, taken out years earlier, loomed large in her mind. If Ben were gone, she'd be free of the marriage, the debts, and the threat of losing her children in a custody battle. The idea took root, a seed of betrayal that would soon sprout into something deadly. June 8th, 2017, the day began quietly at the Rennick property. Ben was in the snake barn, a massive facility where thousands of reptiles slithered in their enclosures. It was his sanctuary, a place where he could escape the tensions at home. Lindley was at the house, her mind racing. She'd been plotting for weeks, her conversations with Humphrey and another accomplice, Ashley Shaw, a spa employee, turning dark. Lindley had already tried once to kill Ben, spiking his protein shake with Percocet in a failed poisoning attempt. This time, she was determined to succeed. Lindley enlisted Humphrey, a man with a criminal past and a loyalty to her that bordered on obsession. She also confided in Shaw, who knew about the insurance policy and Lindley's affairs. The plan was simple but brutal. Lindley would lure Ben to the barn, where Humphrey would help her end his life. Shaw's role was less clear, perhaps a lookout, perhaps a confidant, but her presence tied her to the crime. That afternoon, Lindley told Ben she needed to talk, drawing him into the barn under the pretense of a private conversation. It was a trap, and Ben walked right into it. Inside the barn, the air was thick with the fume of heat lamps and the rustle of scales. Ben, expecting a discussion, was unprepared for what came next. Lindley, armed with a handgun, confronted him. The details were murky. Did she fire the first shot, or did Humphrey? What's certain is that Ben was shot multiple times, bullets tearing through his back, chest, and head. Blood pooled on the concrete floor, the snakes in their cages the only witnesses. Van Rennick, a man who built an empire from his passion, collapsed, his life extinguished in a matter of seconds. Lindley and Humphrey worked quickly to cover their tracks. They left Ben's body in the barn, knowing it wouldn't be found until later. Lindley called 911 that evening, her voice trembling with feigned panic. She claimed she discovered Ben dead, suggesting one of his snakes, an anaconda or python, had escaped and crushed him. It was a plausible story in a barn full of deadly reptiles, and first responders initially bought it. But when they arrived, the scene told a different tale. There were no signs of a snake attack, no constriction marks, no escaped reptiles. Instead, they found bullet holes, shell casings, and a body riddled with gunshot wounds. The investigation pivoted immediately. Detectives ruled out the snake theory, focusing on the human element. Lindley was the obvious suspect. She'd been the last to see Ben, and her story was shaky. She claimed she'd been at the spa all day, but phone records placed her at the property during the murder. Humphrey and Shaw were soon on the radar, their connections to Lindley raising red flags. Investigators dug into the couple's finances, uncovering the $1 million 0-cent insurance policy and Lindley's mounting debts. They also found text messages between Lindley and her lovers, hinting at her desire to be free of Ben. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source, a jailhouse informant. Lindley, while briefly detained on unrelated charges in 2018, confided in a fellow inmate, admitting she'd shot Ben to secure the insurance money and avoid a custody battle. The informant, hoping for leniency, contacted police, providing details only the killer would know. Armed with this, detectives confronted Shaw, who cracked under pressure. She admitted her role, revealing Lindley's plan and Humphrey's involvement. Shaw's testimony was the key, a thread that unraveled the entire conspiracy. Lindley and Humphrey were arrested in 2020, charged with murder and conspiracy. The case took years to build, complicated by the lack of direct forensic evidence tying Lindley to the gun. The murder weapon, believed to be a .22 caliber pistol, was never found, and the shell casings were too damaged for ballistics. But the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. Shaw's testimony, the insurance policy, Lindley's affairs, and the informant's account. Humphrey, meanwhile, was linked to the barn through phone records and witness statements placing him with Lindley that day. The trial, held in 2021, was a spectacle in New Florence. Prosecutors painted Lindley as a calculating femme fatale, a woman who manipulated those around her to eliminate her husband. They called Shaw to the stand, where she tearfully recounted the plot, implicating Lindley and Humphrey. The jailhouse informant testified, her words chilling. Lindley had bragged about pulling the trigger, laughing as she described Ben's final moments. Ben's family, including his brother Sam, sat in the courtroom, their grief tempered by anger. Sam spoke of Ben's kindness, his passion, his dreams for his children. Lindley took everything, he said, his voice breaking. Lindley's defense was a desperate bid to shift blame. Her attorneys argued she was a victim of circumstance, manipulated by Humphrey and Shaw. They claimed she'd been abused by Ben, though no evidence supported this. Humphrey's defense was simpler. He denied being at the barn, insisting Lindley acted alone. The jury saw through the lies. After a week of testimony, they convicted Lindley of second-degree murder and armed criminal action, sentencing her to 16 years. Humphrey was found guilty of first-degree murder, receiving life without parole. Shaw, in exchange for her testimony, walked free, a deal that left many in New Florence bitter. The aftermath was a study in grief and division. Ben's family, particularly Sam, fought to preserve his legacy, taking over Rennick reptiles to honor his passion. They spoke out against Lindley, calling her a snake in human form. The reptile community mourned Ben, their tributes flooding social media with photos of his prized snakes. Lindley's family, meanwhile, stood by her, claiming she'd been unfairly vilified. The town of New Florence, unaccustomed to such drama, was split. Some saw Lindley as a monster, others as a woman driven to desperation by a failing marriage. Ben Rennick's murder exposed the fragility of ambition and the poison of betrayal. His snakes, once symbols of his success, became a haunting reminder of the day he died. The barn, now quiet, stands as a monument to a life cut short, its walls whispering secrets of greed and deceit. The insurance money, Lindley's motive, was never claimed. The policy voided by her conviction. Ben's children, now raised by relatives, carry his memory, their future shaped by a loss they'll never fully understand. Ben Rennick's story is a chilling reminder that the deadliest threats can come from those we love most. He was a man who built a kingdom from his passion, only to be betrayed by the person he trusted with his heart. As the rain falls outside, imagine Ben's final moments. His confusion, his pain, his realization that the woman he married had turned against him. And ask yourself, what lies hidden in the bonds we hold dear? Because in New Florence, Missouri, on a quiet June day, a serpent's venom was human, and a dream became a grave. Part 7, A Marriage of Motives, the Murder of Mary Goff. In the vibrant city of Dublin, Ireland, where history and modernity intertwine, life unfolds with a rhythm all its own. The streets hum with the chatter of locals, the clink of pints in cozy pubs, and the promise of new beginnings. But in March 2001, a quiet suburban home became the stage for a tragedy that would shock a nation. Mary Goff, a 27-year-old wife and mother, was found dead, her death cloaked in a lie that unraveled to reveal a chilling truth. This is the story of a marriage poisoned by control, a crime disguised as an accident, and a family's fight to uncover the darkness within. As the rain falls, let's step into the shadows of Dublin, where love turned lethal. Dublin, 2001. Mary Goff was a woman who embodied warmth and resilience. At 27, she was a devoted mother to her young son Dean and a beloved daughter and sister in a tight-knit family. Born into the working-class suburb of Clondalkin, Mary was known for her infectious laugh and her ability to find joy in the smallest moments. She worked as a receptionist, her friendly demeanor earning her friends wherever she went. Mary's life revolved around her family, her faith, and her dreams of a stable future for her son. But her marriage, the cornerstone of that future, was beginning to crack. Mary met Colin Whalen in the late 1990s, a charming man with a quick smile and a knack for winning people over. Colin, in his early 30s, was a mechanic with a steady job and a seemingly bright future. Their courtship was whirlwind. Mary was drawn to Colin's confidence, his promises of a life together. They married in 2000, settling into a modest home in Clondalkin. The outsiders, they were a typical young couple, navigating the challenges of marriage and parenthood. But behind closed doors, a different story was unfolding. Colin Whelan was not the man he appeared to be. Beneath his charm was a controlling nature, a need to dominate those around him. Mary, once vibrant and independent, began to change. Friends noticed her growing quieter, her laughter less frequent. Colin dictated her movements, her friendships, even her appearance. He'd fly into rages over minor infractions, a late dinner, a phone call he didn't approve of. Mary confided in her sister Lisa that she was unhappy, that Colin's temper scared her. She talked about leaving, but the fear of losing Dean and the stigma of divorce kept her tethered to the marriage. By early 2001, the marriage was on the brink. Mary had started standing up to Colin, reclaiming pieces of her independence. She reconnected with old friends, spent more time with her family, and even considered returning to work full-time. Colin, sensing his control slipping, grew volatile. He began researching ways to secure his future without Mary, his mind turning to a £400,000 sterling 0 pence life insurance policy they'd taken out on each other. The policy, meant to protect Dean, became a motive, a glittering prize that promised freedom and a fresh start. Colin's thoughts darkened, and a plan began to form. March 1st, 21. The day began like any other in the Whelan household. Mary spent the morning with Dean, playing with him in their small garden. Colin was at work, or so he claimed, his demeanor unremarkable to colleagues. But something was brewing. That evening, Mary was alone in the house. Dean was with her parents, a rare night of quiet for the young mother. Colin returned home around 7 p.m., the air between them thick with unspoken tension. What happened next would become a matter of fierce debate, a puzzle pieced together from lies and evidence. According to Colin, he found Mary at the bottom of the stairs when he got home. Her body crumpled, her face pale. He claimed she'd fallen in an accident caused by a misstep or a dizzy spell. He called emergency services, his voice shaken as he begged for help. Paramedics arrived to a grim scene. Mary was unresponsive, her body cold. They pronounced her dead at the scene, and the initial report listed the cause as blunt force trauma from a fall. Colin played the grieving husband, tears streaming as he told police he'd been at work all day only to come home to tragedy. But the police weren't convinced. The scene felt staged, the details too convenient. Mary's body showed signs that didn't align with a simple fall. There were bruises on her neck, faint but unmistakable, and blood on the walls that suggested a struggle. The stairs, steep but carpeted, seemed an unlikely cause of such severe injuries. Detectives began to dig, their suspicions falling on Colin. They interviewed Mary's family, who painted a starkly different picture of the marriage. Lisa, Mary's sister, was adamant Mary was afraid of him. She wanted out. Friends echoed this, recalling Colin's controlling behavior and Mary's plans to leave. The autopsy was the turning point. It revealed that Mary hadn't died from a fall. The bruises on her neck were consistent with strangulation, the pressure applied with force and intent. There were no fractures or injuries typical of a stair fall, only the telltale marks of a killer's hands. Blood evidence on a bathrobe belt found in the laundry tested positive for Mary's DNA, suggesting it was the murder weapon. The forensic team uncovered another chilling clue. Colin's computer showed recent searches for how to strangle someone and accidental death cover-ups conducted in the weeks before Mary's death. The accident narrative was crumbling. Colin's story began to unravel. He claimed he'd been at work until 7 p.m., but coworkers confirmed he'd left early, giving him a window of opportunity. Phone records showed he'd called Mary multiple times that afternoon, perhaps luring her into a confrontation. Neighbors reported hearing raised voices from the house around 6 p.m., a detail Colin couldn't explain. The insurance policy, worth £400,000 sterling, 0 pence, became a focal point. Colin had inquired about its payout process just days before the murder. The pieces were falling into place, painting a picture of a man driven by greed and desperation. Colin was arrested on March 5th, charged with murder. He maintained his innocence, sticking to the false story even as the evidence mounted, but his composure cracked when police confronted him with the computer searches and the blood on the bathrobe belt. He offered no explanation, his silence damning. The investigation took a dramatic turn when Colin, released on bail, fled to Spain, hoping to vanish into the Costa del Sol. Irish authorities working with Interpol tracked him to a small apartment in Malaga. He was extradited back to Dublin in 2002, his escape attempt a final act of cowardice. The trial, held in 2005, gripped Ireland. Prosecutors presented a meticulous case weaving together the forensic evidence, the computer searches, and the testimony of Mary's family. Lisa took the stand, her voice steady as she described Mary's fear of Colin, her plans to leave, her love for Dean. She was trying to be free, Lisa said, tears falling. He couldn't let her go. The blood on the bathrobe belt, the strangulation marks, and the insurance policy were the cornerstones of the prosecution's case, each piece a nail in Colin's coffin. The defense argued that the evidence was circumstantial, suggesting Mary's death could still be accidental, but their claims rang hollow. Colin's decision to testify was a miscalculation. Under cross-examination, he faltered, unable to explain the computer searches or the inconsistencies in his timeline. His demeanor cold, detached, alienated the jury. After a 3-week trial, they deliberated for just 6 hours before returning a verdict: guilty of murder. The judge sentenced Colin to life in prison, a term that ensured he'd spend decades behind bars. Mary's family, seated in the courtroom, wept, their relief tempered by the weight of their loss. "Justice for Mary," Lisa whispered, clutching a photo of her sister. The aftermath was a reckoning for Dublin. Mary's death sparked a national conversation about domestic violence, shining a light on the hidden struggles of women trapped in controlling relationships. Her family, led by Lisa, became advocates, working with shelters and charities to support survivors. They established a fund in Mary's name, helping single mothers like her build new lives. Fondalkin, a community that had rallied around the Goffs, mourned Mary with vigils and tributes, her memory a beacon of resilience. The house where she died was sold, its new owners unaware of the tragedy it held. Colin Whelan's conviction didn't erase the pain. Mary's son, Dean, grew up without his mother, raised by her parents and Lisa. They told him stories of Mary's laughter, her love, ensuring her spirit lived on. The insurance money, Colin's motive, was never claimed, the policy voided by his crime. In prison, Colin remained unrepentant, his appeals for a reduced sentence denied. The bathrobe belt, a mundane household item turned murder weapon, became a symbol of the banality of evil, a reminder that danger can hide in the everyday. Mary Goff's story is a haunting testament to the fragility of trust, the cost of control, and the strength of those left behind. She was a woman who dreamed of freedom, who loved her son with every fiber of her being, only to be betrayed by the man she had vowed to spend her life with. As the rain falls outside, imagine Mary's final moments, her courage, her fight, her hope for Dean's future. And ask yourself, what secrets lurk in the marriages we see as ordinary? Because in Dublin, Ireland, on a quiet March evening, a husband's greed became a death sentence and a family's heart was forever broken. Part 8, A Family Betrayed, The Murders of Rachel Souza and Lillian Rose. In the quaint town of Hopkinton, Massachusetts, where colonial homes and tree-lined streets evoke a sense of timeless charm, life feels insulated from the chaos of the world. It's a place where families settle to build dreams, where neighbors wave and children play without fear. But in January 2006, this idyllic community was shattered by a crime so unimaginable, it left scars that linger to this day. Rachel Souza, a devoted mother and teacher, and her infant daughter, Lillian Rose, were taken in an act of cold-blooded betrayal. This is the story of a facade of love, a husband's descent into darkness, and a town forever haunted by loss. As the rain falls, let's step into the shadows of Hopkinton, where a family's dream became a nightmare. Hopkinton in 2005, Rachel Souza was a woman who radiated kindness. At 29, she was a high school English teacher, beloved by her students for her warmth and encouragement. Born in Massachusetts, Rachel was the heart of her family, a daughter and sister who brought light to every gathering. Her life took a joyful turn when she met Neil Entwistle, a charming British engineer during her college years at the University of York. Their romance was a fairy tale, Rachel the American dreamer and Neil the polished Englishman with a quick wit. They married in 2003, their wedding a celebration of love across continents. By 2005, Rachel and Neil had welcomed their daughter, Lillian Rose, a 9-month-old bundle of joy who became the center of their world. The couple moved to Hopkinton, renting a spacious home on a quiet street, eager to start their American chapter. Rachel took maternity leave to care for Lillian, while Neil worked remotely for a tech startup. To neighbors, they were the perfect family. Rachel pushing Lillian's stroller, Neil mowing the lawn, their smiles a picture of contentment. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming, invisible to those who saw only the polished exterior. Neil Entwistle was not the man he seemed. Behind his charming facade was a man drowning in failure and deceit. His tech startup was a sham, a front for schemes that never materialized. Neil had racked up thousands in debt, maxing out credit cards and draining the couple's savings. He'd also begun leading a double life, engaging in online affairs through adult websites, seeking validation in virtual encounters. Rachel, busy with motherhood, was unaware of the extent of Neil's troubles, though she noticed his growing distance, his excuses about work and money. She confided in her mother, Priscilla, that she felt something was off, but her love for Neil and Lillian kept her hopeful. By late 2005, Neil's world was collapsing. Creditors were closing in on his online ventures. Scams posing as legitimate businesses were unraveling. He faced the prospect of returning to England in disgrace, a failure in the eyes of his family and Rachel's. The couple's life insurance policies, each worth $500,000, 0 cents, became a fixation. Neil began to see a way out, a path to erase his debts and start anew. His research turned chilling. He searched online for how to kill with a gun and fastest way to murder someone. The queries time-stamped in the weeks before the tragedy. A plan was taking shape, one that would destroy the family he'd vowed to protect. January 20, 2006. The day began with the quiet routine of a winter morning. Rachel was at home with Lillian, playing in the nursery, unaware of the storm brewing in Neil's mind. Neil had driven to Carver, Massachusetts the day before to retrieve a .22 caliber Colt revolver from his father-in-law's gun collection. He'd visited Joe and Priscilla Matarazzo under the pretense of a family visit, slipping the gun from their safe while they were distracted. The weapon, small but deadly, was now in his possession, its purpose clear only to him. That morning, Neil returned home, the revolver hidden in his coat. Rachel was in the master bedroom, Lillian napping in her crib. The house was silent, the kind of stillness that amplifies every creak and whisper. Neil approached Rachel, his demeanor calm, betraying nothing. Without warning, he raised the gun and fired, a single shot piercing Rachel's chest. She collapsed, her body falling onto the bed, blood soaking the sheets. Lillian, stirred by the noise, began to cry. Neil moved to her crib, his face expressionless, and fired again, the bullet striking the infant's tiny body. In moments, the heart of the Entwistle family was gone, their lives extinguished by the man who promised to love them. Neil's actions after the murders were as calculated as the crime itself. He placed the gun back in Rachel's hands, staging the scene to suggest a suicide or accident. He covered their bodies with a blanket, a feeble attempt to delay discovery. Then he fled, driving to Logan International Airport and booking a one-way flight to London. He left no note, no explanation, only a trail of lies. In England, he contacted his parents, claiming he'd found Rachel and Lillian dead and panicked, unable to cope. His story was flimsy, a desperate bid to deflect suspicion, but it bought him time. The bodies were discovered 2 days later on January 22. Rachel's mother, Priscilla, grew worried when she couldn't reach her daughter. She and Joe drove to Hopkinton using their spare key to enter the house. The silence was oppressive, the air heavy with dread. In the master bedroom, they found Rachel and Lillian, their bodies still, the blanket concealing the horror. Priscilla's screams echoed through the house as Joe called 911, their world collapsing in an instant. Police arrived, their training no match for the grief that filled the room. The scene was a puzzle. Blood on the bed, a gun in Rachel's hand, but no signs of a struggle. The investigation moved swiftly. Detectives ruled out suicide almost immediately. The angle of the gunshot wounds was inconsistent with self-infliction, and Lillian's death pointed to a deliberate act. The Colt revolver traced to Joe's collection was a critical clue. Neil was one of the few who knew where it was kept. His sudden flight to England raised red flags, and his internet history, recovered from the family computer, was damning. Searches for murder methods, gun ranges, and life insurance payouts. Phone records showed Neil's movements, placing him at the house during the time of the murders. The evidence was building, a noose tightening around a man halfway across the Atlantic. Neil's arrest came on February 9, 2006. British police, acting on a U.S. warrant, apprehended him at a London underground station. He was disheveled, living off his parents' support, his story of panic crumbling under scrutiny. Extradited to Massachusetts, Neil faced charges of 2 counts of first-degree murder. He maintained his innocence, claiming he'd found Rachel and Lillian dead and fled in shock. But the evidence told a different story, one of premeditation, greed, and a man desperate to escape his failures. 2008. Held in 2008, captivated Hopkinton and beyond. Prosecutors presented a meticulous case, weaving together the forensic evidence, Neil's internet searches, and his flight to England. The gun, recovered from the crime scene, bore traces of Rachel's blood but no fingerprints, suggesting it had been wiped clean. Ballistics confirmed it as the murder weapon, and Joe's testimony about Neil's access to the safe was unshakable. Rachel's family, led by Priscilla, sat in the courtroom, their faces etched with grief. Priscilla spoke of Rachel's love for teaching, her joy in motherhood, her trust in Neil. "He took everything," she said, her voice breaking. Neil's defense was a gamble. His attorneys argued that Rachel had killed Lillian and then herself, driven by postpartum depression. They claimed Neil's flight was a trauma response, not an admission of guilt. The theory was baseless. No medical records supported depression, and Rachel's family testified to her happiness as a mother. The jury, unmoved, deliberated for just 2 days before convicting Neil on both counts. The judge sentenced him to life without parole, a term that ensured he'd never walk free. Rachel's family wept, their relief tempered by the weight of their loss. The aftermath was a study in grief and resilience. Hopkinton, a town unaccustomed to such horror, rallied around the Matarazzos. Vigils filled the town common, candles flickering in memory of Rachel and Lillian. The family held a private funeral, excluding Neil's name from the service, a final act of reclaiming their daughter and granddaughter. Priscilla and Joe became advocates for domestic violence awareness, warning others about the signs of hidden betrayal. Rachel's students created a scholarship in her name, honoring her passion for education. Lillian's nursery, left untouched, became a shrine, a reminder of a life barely begun. Neil Entwistle's conviction offered little closure. In prison, he launched appeals, claiming ineffective counsel and prosecutorial misconduct, but all were denied. His parents in England stood by him, insisting on his innocence, a stance that deepened the rift with Rachel's family. The house in Hopkinton was sold, its new owners unaware of the tragedy it held. The insurance policies Neil's motive were voided, his dreams of a fresh start reduced to ash. Hopkinton, forever marked, became a place of quiet reflection, its residents wary of the strangers who smiled too easily. Rachel Souza and Lillian Rose's story is a heartbreaking reminder that evil can wear the face of love, that the people we trust most can harbor the darkest intentions. Rachel was a woman who lived for her daughter, her students, her family, only to be betrayed by the man she called her partner. Lillian, an innocent child, was a casualty of her father's greed. As the rain falls outside, imagine their final moments. Rachel's shock, Lillian's cries, the silence that followed. And ask yourself, how well do we know the ones we hold closest? Because in Hopkinton, Massachusetts, on a cold January morning, a husband's lies became a death sentence, and a town's innocence was lost forever. And so we leave the shadows of Hopkinton, but the stories linger, carried by the rain. These tales of loss and betrayal remind us that darkness can hide in the places we feel safest, in the hearts we trust most. As you drift into sleep, let the rain wash away the weight of these truths, but carry their lessons with you, for in the shadows of the past, there are always more stories waiting. Until we meet again.